And so if we have, a loving relationship with ourselves, or like certain aspects in our life that help us to deal with our emotions and process them, then we won't reach out for the thing. Because when we reach outside of ourselves for anything, it is because we are not addressing the pain or discomfort, uncomfortable emotions that we have on the inside. And so I think it like I said, it all roots from pain. It just depends on how much pain we have and then how willing we are to go into our darkness.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. We have a deep theme today, this idea of addiction and recovery, whether you are in recovery yourself, or again, I personally think we are all addicts in our own ways. There is so much wisdom that our guest, Erin Colleen Linzi, has to share with us. She is an addiction and eating disorder recovery. She's struggled with drinking, pills, and bulimia for 12 years. After getting a divorce, getting laid off from her job, and being completely fatigued and bedridden, she rose from that rock bottom place and found peace through nourishing her body, through yoga, meditation, and life coaching. She now owns her own yoga studio called Thrive Yoga and Fitness, and a recovery coaching company called Thriving After Addiction. She's here today to share all her wisdom with us. According to her, under every addiction is unaddressed pain. So we're really going to be covering with Erin, how do we sit with that pain when it's uncomfortable? How do we hold it? And ultimately, how do we transform it? We're going to learn her clear, CLEAR formula for self-inquiry. And we're going to talk about how the root cause of many addictive behaviors stem from this false past memory that we might have, often a memory from our childhood. Again, these ideas are relevant to all of us, regardless of whether you're currently in recovery. Before we dive into the episode, I wanted to remind you that there's two things you can do to support the podcast if you enjoy it. You can leave a rating or review here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show. This helps us get the show in front of more people looking to transform their life through yoga and meditation. It really means the world to me. And the other thing you can do is shop at savannahspirit.com. If you're looking for some unique yoga clothing, Savannah's got you covered, from yoga pants to graphic tees to their comfy tie fisherman pants, which I have my eye on right now. They're so chic. You can dress them up, dress them down, to mala beads. Check out all the gorgeous finds at savannahspirit.com, and remember to use the code podcast30 for 30% off your first order. All right, now diving into our time with Erin, here we go. Under every addiction and eating disorder is unaddressed pain. We must be willing to experience and hold space for our emotions to fully recover. Part of this process is opening our heart to accept our dark and our light. Erin, you wrote this to me, and I just love this so much. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
This idea of accepting our dark to let in the light is something I really want us to focus on today. And I think the best way to start is really for you to share with us your story.
I am an addict in recovery, and I had an eating disorder, and I am currently in recovery. So just so you know what you're working with. And I started, where do I begin? So I think I'll start just to kind of give a little snippet of the person that I was, because I'm so different now. But I was an just disgruntled, angry, aggressive, just type person. And I was into martial arts, and I was also into drinking, taking pills, and just finding different ways. And I think this is where martial arts started with me, finding different ways to abuse myself. And it's kind of curious because when I look back at that now, being, very much in the yoga world, I think the reason that I did do that is because I had so much pain on the inside that I didn't know how to address it. I didn't know what to do with it. And so what would happen is that it would just sort of compound within me. And so I found different ways to sort of address it or numb it the best way I could, right? Because I didn't really have any tools. And so I got into full contact sports, and I, would use pills and alcohol, and, I developed a pretty serious eating disorder, bulimia. And that sort of carried with me. And, it's like that started all when I was like in my teens, my younger teens, and carried with me until, my young adult life. And, your problems start to get more serious. The way you lash out and sabotage yourself starts to have, bigger consequences. And so I wound up, I think my first wake up call with all that pain and just the destruction I was causing to myself was when I got a DUI when I was 16. And so I was very much out of control. And, when that happened, it just sort of like woke me up a little bit, just enough to make some changes. And so by the time I reached college, I had pretty much gotten the alcohol under control, but I was still using pills. And so fast forward, I wound up going to Japan, and I took my first yoga class that was like all in Japanese. So that was fun and interesting. But I remember the feeling that I had afterwards. It's like all of the mean voices that I would deal with, all of the pain that I had on the inside. And by the way, I was going to yoga to totally like burn calories and like sweat, and like there was nothing enlightened about it. But I like to say nowadays, whatever brings you to the mat.
And I can totally relate to that, by the way. I was like a competitive Bikram yoga person when I first started out. And not to derail you, but before you go deeper into telling us, I feel like I can just relate to so much of what you're talking about when you're describing who you were. And I'm sure the listeners can as well. And I'm curious, do you think that we're all addicts, but just in different ways?
I appreciate that question so much. I think that we develop different coping methods. And I think a lot of the times unaddressed, if we're unaware of ourselves, like we're not practicing swadhyaya and studying ourselves, that it can go into a deeper groove pattern, right? And then we can, become really addicted. And I think there's different levels of addiction. But to answer your question, I think that yes, I think just about everyone has addictions of varying levels and different ways to sabotage ourselves for sure.
I know. I think so many of us are just addicted to stress or addicted to certain thought patterns or negative self-talk. And I just think what you're going to share with us today is so universal, even for people who maybe haven't suffered the same eating disorder as you.
Yeah, sure. And, because the pain manifests in different ways. I mean, if we flip it and say we're really tuned in to universal guidance and the love of God, or however you interpret that higher power, it expresses in us so different, right? Like we become painters or dancers or podcasters, right? But it's like pain can do the same thing in a more destructive way. So the pain manifests in us, and all of a sudden we're like sabotaging all of our relationships. We're hurting people physically or verbally. We are abusing ourselves with pills, alcohol, different substances, or an eating disorder. And so I think we just kind of discover different outlets for that pain, unless we start to develop some tools and kind of can take a step back from ourselves and say, okay, the ways that I've been managing this isn't really working for me anymore, and I want to find something different. And I think until you come to that point, you're going to be stuck in that darkness and that madness.
I love that you use the word tools, right? Because it's like enter yoga, right? So you're in Japan, you take this very first class with no spiritual motive, really. And what happens next?
Yeah, so I was in class, and like honestly, like halfway through class, I was like, this is stupid. Like, this is like, we're breathing. The lady's talking so slow, even though it's, in Japanese. And so anyways, Shavasana came, and I had been sweating and breathing. I was like, all right, this is okay. And then all of a sudden, there was this moment where all of the negative voices went away. All of the pain like flushed out of me in an instant. And I felt this deep connection with every single person around me. And it was the most incredible thing that I touched deep inside of myself that I didn't even know existed. And yoga gave that to me in that one moment.
And this is your first class?
That was no, okay. So I've done like yoga before. That was like my first like class. Does that make sense? Like first studio class.
First studio class. Wow, that's a lot of bang for your buck with that studio class. Wow.
Worth every penny.
Yeah.
So it was, I mean, I don't know if it was the postures or just like, I think most of it was, so maybe you're familiar with like the stories of like Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie about how they were like just in such a miserable space that they found enlightenment like through that you just couldn't go any lower in your darkness as far as like their threshold. And I think I was at that point. I was, binging and purging. I was taking pills. Like I would drink like in the middle of work, like when I had a break. It was bad. It was really bad. My relationships were falling apart. And I think I had so much suffering that I had nowhere else to go. It cornered me. And some sort of intervention happened within me that just made me open up and surrender. Like I couldn't fight anymore. I was too tired. I was too exhausted. And then this light kind of came into me. Now it didn't stay long, but I got to taste it. It was just like a little sample serving. It's like you put your finger, and try the batter of like a delicious cake being made. I was like, oh my God, I've never tasted something so delicious. And so from then on, I was hooked on yoga and I'm so grateful.
So from there evolved, I'm guessing, a yoga practice, eventually a meditation practice, study of yoga philosophy. I heard you use the word svadhyaya earlier. So from there, just you became, like me, a yoga addict.
Yeah. So I was able to funnel, my, I guess, aggressions or thoughts into a yoga practice. And then I started to soften, which was surprising. And I kind of wanted to hold on, with the martial arts background onto that identity of being a tough girl. And I resisted that for a little bit, but when the universe has bigger plans for you, then you eventually have to surrender. So yes, I started home practicing. I started with a mix of just vinyasa flow, mixed in some Kundalini. A friend of mine who had been, really bad alcoholic as well, got clean, and she started doing a Kundalini yoga. And so she introduced me to some aspects there. So I started practicing at home. And then I came to the point where I decided to take my first yoga teacher training. And that was right around where I was having a divorce, because so things were, yoga definitely helped me in a lot of ways. But, the relationship I don't think was meant to be. And so that, again, that little crisis spurred an opportunity for me to go deeper inside of myself.
It sounds like you had this incredible awakening. And for people who are struggling with addiction, and I think we should talk about like the different levels of addiction, like subtle addictions that we all have. Again, like I was mentioning, either maybe to negative thoughts from, large scale chronic health problems, like something like bulimia, like you dealt with. Do you think there's a certain kind of yoga or style of meditation that is best for people to start with if they find themselves?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to go with what appeals to you. Whether, I like to say, whatever brings you to the mat as far as what kind of yoga to start with, because I happened to choose the right class that I went to when I was in Japan, but I've seen heard a lot of people, because I own a yoga studio now, and some people will say, oh, I took yoga and it was boring, or I took yoga and it was way too hard. And there's just like so many, as far as the Rolodex of kinds of yoga. I think if people just go with what, to try out a bunch of classes, go with what resonates with you and stick around, try a couple of classes and see what works for you. So for that. As far as levels of addiction, I feel like we have, so addiction in a sense is like this groove pattern in the brain, right? And there's these reward systems, right, that you associate with a certain thing. And so it can be checking your Facebook posts or something, or it could be, a certain connotation you have with drinking, like it's not just about the alcohol. It's about, maybe when I drink, I feel like I can be a different person, or I can kind of numb out the person that I don't like, right? The darkness, rather than going through it and going to the light, I numb it out. And so I feel like we can use certain things, but then when we start to gain attachments to them, right? That's when it starts to become a problem. We keep going to it, not addressing the pain on the inside. So it just depends. For those of us who have a lot of compounded pain, like I did, I just kept reaching to the thing because I was like, oh, I couldn't even think straight. I didn't know what to do with the pain. And so if we have, a loving relationship with ourselves, or like certain aspects in our life that help us to deal with our emotions and process them, then we won't reach out for the thing. Because when we reach outside of ourselves for anything, it is because we are not addressing the pain or discomfort, uncomfortable emotions that we have on the inside. And so I think it like I said, it all roots from pain. It just depends on how much pain we have and then how willing we are to go into our darkness.
What does that self-inquiry process look like? Say when you're working with someone or trying to help a student or a client and they have this addiction, how do you help them turn that around to sort of explore what you're saying, what the root cause, what the real pain is?
So I love that question, by the way, because it's different for everyone, but I do have certain patterns of clients that I see. So typically, so we'll break it down in two categories. I have either someone who's super intellectual, right? And you have to sort of go in through their mind because they're just so disconnected from their body. They won't even, they don't even know about energy or source or anything like that. And so you have to reason with their mind. So I have tools for that. Then there's other people that are more sort of kinesthetic. And by the way, I think people that do yoga start to develop this sort of sensitivity within them to where they can access their emotions and feel what's going on. So I usually kind of screen, I can figure this out by asking clients, how do you feel right now? Or how do you feel right before you take a drink or hit a joint or, whatever the case may be. And if, usually they have to sit and think about it because either way they're disconnected from their emotions. But if they can't give me an answer, even if I pry, I have to go in through the mind. And so when I do that, I have to use tools like, we can look at their circumstances, break down the facts, and then like kind of categorize their thoughts. For example, so if I took a circumstance like my mother yelled at me, right? So that would be a circumstance. What is your thought about it? So a lot of times the intellectual people are really good at targeting their thoughts. Well, I thought she's a terrible person, or I thought she doesn't love me. And then we start to figure out, we plug in their emotions. So there's actually a formula I have. It's called the CLEAR formula. So to list that out, the C is for circumstances, right? The things that happen around us. The L is for look at your thought, right? So your thoughts or opinions or judgments that you have about a circumstance. E, it just stands for emotions, right? So the emotions that happened that are caused by your thoughts, right? And then emotions lead to actions or inactions, right? So the things that we do when we're in that emotional state. And then the R stands for results. So when we do all those things and go through the patterns, it results in this, right? And so with the intellectual, we can sort of plug in that formula and use that to help them kind of see, take a step back from themselves and create space so that they can see that they're choosing their thoughts, number one, because accountability with addiction is huge. If you're not taking accountability, you can't get well. And once they do that, then they can see the pattern. And I think for them, they need that sort of empirical data, to be able to buy into my case that I'm presenting. So with people who are intellectual, I take that route. With people who are more kinesthetic or a little bit more in touch with their emotions, we use the same formula, and I can use sort of energy work in different ways. But, what are you feeling? Eventually they give me a feeling. For example, it's very common with those who've had eating disorders, loneliness. I feel lonely. I don't feel like anyone's around. I don't feel like anyone cares, and then we just go into those thoughts, and I have them travel in themselves and feel in that moment, wherever it is in their body. Sometimes it's in their stomach. For me, that was my area, right? Around the heart, around the throat, sometimes in the head. I have a client, she has migraines, and when she goes into her emotions and tries to find her pain, a lot of times it's in her head. It starts there when she's resisting. And so it's so fascinating the way we're kind of different, but I've developed tools for both cases, which I'm very grateful for.
I think it's so great as someone who also trains teachers. It is so clear that we need to have multiple approaches because people are so different and they learn in different ways. How does someone know if they're addicted to something? Because that's really the first step, right?
That's a good question too. So I think, number one thing is awareness, right? If we are not studying ourselves and noticing our, checking in with ourselves. So for me, I think I was such a ball of tension and just unhappy. When I finally realized that I was, addicted to multiple things, is because I was so miserable all the time and I wouldn't sit with it. I would act out from it. I was just a violent, kind of nasty person before I discovered yoga and all the tools that I have. And so if we're going towards something again and again and again, even when the results, even when it's not serving us anymore, but we can't help ourselves. We keep reaching for it and we try to stop and we can't. We try to stop and we can't. Those are some indicators that you might be addicted to substance. Again, sometimes it's sneaky. Like I love how you said in the beginning about we can be addicted to thought patterns. Totally. That's more of a causation. We can be addicted to stress. Yes. People can be addicted to other people, codependency.
Yeah, different types of relationships, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, codependency is huge in the recovery community. And so when I wrote my book, which is it's on Kickstarter right now, we're raising funds for it. But I address all of the addictions, right? Because they all stem from the same source. It's from that pain. And it's not that we're not willing to access it, because the people that I'm speaking to are the ones that they want to go in there. They just have no idea how, because you have to, like I said, come to a certain point where you have to surrender because you're tired of fighting and you don't know where to turn. That's when that person would pick up my book and be like, wow, this is a book with yoga videos and meditations and a whole program to help guide me into this space of recovery so I can reclaim my life.
How do we sit with the pain? What advice do you give people? Because that's that first step, right? Is you have to stop reaching out and get quiet with yourself and actually feel it.
I think there needs to be a certain amount of space for us to be able to access our pain. And a lot of times when I first start coaching people, they haven't developed that space within them, because a lot of the times we're so close to the pain, we think it's us and we don't like it and we resist it and we ball it up. And so for those listeners at home, like maybe they have some pain or they want to try this, deep breaths, right? So the breath bridges the gap between the mind and the body. So starting with deep breaths and then checking in with yourself, ask yourself the question, how do I feel right now? Right? And even if it's just uncomfortable or, you can't really target a particular emotion, that's okay. What color is it? What's the shape? Where is it at in my body? Identify it as much as you can and then place your hand over it maybe. And then breathe into it and really just try to hold space for it, right? So relax your shoulders. The breath really helps us to go from that sympathetic nervous system into parasympathetic so we can start to sensitize ourselves. And then once we start to become more sensitive, we notice the subtle energies within us. It's going to become more clear. It's a process though, and it's something that is beyond the realm of the mind to understand. I can talk about it, but there's probably, some people that listen to your podcast that, they'd be like, yoga, I don't quite understand, or they're just getting into yoga. But I promise you, with the yoga practice and practicing things like this, you do become more sensitive to the energy. Once you've done that and you've really honed in on it, it might hit you and you might resist. A lot of times, actually, the resistance will come. I promise you, the resistance is worse than the actual emotion. You have to be brave enough to let that go and soften into it. Tears might come, anger, laughter, all types of things. But being willing to sit with it. And then once you hone in on it and you feel it and you're like, aha, this is shame. Aha, this is guilt. Allow it to expand through your body and flow. Remember that your body is an innocent vessel. It loves you so deeply. And it is here to help you process these vibrations. And they're just vibrations. And then once they become thin, a lot of the times I'll give a technique of traveling through that thin veil, see what's on the other side. And a lot of times when people numb out negative emotions, they'll also numb out the positive ones. And sometimes people don't realize that, because when you numb out one, you numb them all out. And so that's a technique that I use to help people start to get more familiar, hold space. And so I would say as a practice to, set a time that you dedicate to feeling your feelings, right? It sounds silly, but really, we don't know how to do it. A lot of people do not know how to feel their feelings. And there's certain emotions that, we avoid and others that we're a little bit more comfortable with. So you can also start with one that you're more comfortable with bringing up. So there's different ways.
What does that look like for you, or what do you suggest your clients do? Is it like set an alarm, like 7 a.m., sit and feel your feelings, or is this something you're doing part of a meditation practice? I couldn't agree with you more. I think for me, journaling has been huge in terms of just checking in with myself daily and seeing how I actually feel before I just rush forward to tackle the next thing. What is it that you found most effective?
So a couple of things, well, different things for different people, right? But I think journaling is a beautiful tool. And when you write, a lot of times, a lot of feelings can come up and you have a sort of vent for the pressure cooker that we are. You can do it on a walk, or if you're more just, I want to be like, I'm more the, like, I want to be still. I want to feel it because like I need to, like, that's how I need to access it, is just stillness. And so I will do it either within my meditation, or sometimes, depending on my circumstances, there's a lot going on in my life, then I'll carve out a special little snippet for that time. And yeah, set a timer, set a reminder, do whatever you have to do to make it happen. I tell clients also to, use the backdrop of their screen of their iPhone as a reminder, why you're doing this, because I love myself. I am capable of change and transformation. Make sure you sit with your feelings, something like that. So, but I find that like little timers, because we're so run by our little technologies, that really helps.
Can you give us an example of a client or someone you were working with that was really struggling with pinpointing where their addiction was sort of coming from and how they had a breakthrough? I think for a lot of us, we know we feel pain, or we know we're addicted to even just sugar, right? Like that's like a huge one for so many of us. But it's like, how do we uncover what's really going on behind what's going on?
Yeah, that's good. So I had one client I'm thinking of, and she came in and she was very, very, very angry, and we would argue. And I started with trying to coach her because she seemed like the intellectual type. And she started to reject that type of approach, which was fine. I'm up for a challenge. And one day I came in, I was like, you know what? We're going to try something different. So I was like, hey, listen, we're going to do some yoga today. And of course there was resistance. I don't want to do yoga. But I was like, no, just trust me. I'm your coach. So trust me. And so she did submit. And so we did some yoga, and the breathing and the stretching and the moving of the body was exactly what we needed to crack that shell on her heart a little bit. And she looked at me, like, after everything was all said and done, we wound up doing chair yoga because of some of her limitations. And she said, I feel things in my body I've never felt before. I haven't felt for a long time. And all of a sudden, all this stuff started to come up. And so then she started remembering things from her childhood that she had actively suppressed. Because a lot of times, we will forget about, and it doesn't even have to be like big traumas, for sure those can get locked up in the nooks and crannies of our mind. But a lot of times it's something that seemingly to us seemed epic at that moment. And when you're a child, sometimes your perception of what is happening is way more painful than the actual circumstance. And so with that particular client, she was able to find out there was some things that happened with her family, as far as like compare contrast with the mother involved, that really just struck a pain chord with her and was responsible for her food addiction. And after that, the coaching became a lot easier. We kept doing the yoga because she needed to access, like we had to access through her body. She was more kinesthetic. So I was thrown off a little bit, but luckily I was able to sort of catch it and follow my intuition and guide that client.
And it sounds like getting to that root cause or that root pain point was hugely important, and maybe something we all should self-reflect on, because I think for many of us, so many of our addictive behaviors, it all starts with something like a memory, like a trigger point. Do you find that to be true?
I think that a lot of the times it is. And sometimes we have memories that are false, right? So we have these sort of false past memories of the way somebody was treating us and why. There's one example popping in my head. I had a client who he believed that his father, didn't want to play catch with him. And so his father didn't love him in that moment. And it was just a little snip of memory, like in the film of life. It was like one of those little cells of, film that we were looking at. And, we questioned it. So we kind of went back. We did some sort of inner child work and, him speaking to his younger self. And he was able to ask is it true that your father doesn't love you or didn't love you in that moment? And he realized how sort of ridiculous that was, but how long he chose to believe it. And it was uncovered. It was going on in his subconscious for so long. It was like a repeat record. Like for anyone who's ever worked at a mall, they play the Christmas music like over and over and over again. And you just kind of like drown it out, but it's there. I think it was kind of similar to that because he had this record playing and playing and playing in his mind, and he didn't even realize it was there when he uncovered it. And we asked if it was true or not. And then we kind of proved it wrong. Boy, oh boy, did his heart open. I mean, you could like feel it. And this was somebody who was across the other side of the world from me. You could feel his heart opening energetically just talking to him. And so sometimes, or I'm going to say a lot of the time, it goes back into these little snippets of memory where we have this perception that somebody rejected us or that, nobody cared, so on and so forth. And it has real life impact on us in present time.
Savannah family, Erin has so much more to share with us. We're going to go deeper into this idea of false past memories. And we're going to talk a lot about one of my favorite topics, the victim mindset that so many of us can slip into when we're feeling overwhelmed or worn down. Erin's going to share a personal story with us in the next episode of how she struggled with this victim mindset, even in a recent fight with her husband. We're going to be talking about how to balance self-compassion with discipline. That's a question you ask me all the time, right? How do we balance self-love with kind of being hard on ourselves, especially when we're trying to form a new habit? And we're also going to learn about how we can make our yoga practice play an active role in overcoming addictive behaviors. That's all coming up on the next episode. I'm excited to connect with you again then. For now, have a beautiful day full of yoga and meditation. Make sure to take a deep breath and know I'm sending you so much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.